Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh, and today I am joined by Mickey
Hey everyone.
and Fry.
Hello.
Today we are going to be talking about the Trade Federation, or let's explore globalization through the Star Wars prequels, a play by Andy Boyd, who will be joining us in a moment. A lot of people these days, you often hear things like, why do you have to make things so political, or you should keep your politics out of Star Wars? And I have always been of the belief that politics is inherent in Star Wars. And I think a cheeky but very apt and very well done demonstration of this is Mr. Boyd's play that we're going to be talking about today. So I'd like to introduce Andy Boyd and welcome him to Trash Compactor.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk about the play.
So, Andy, you're a playwright based out of Brooklyn. You're a podcaster.
I also write songs and I make little cartoons, which I've posted on my Instagram page. Those are my main media.
So you're an overall just around creative guy. I can get behind that. I admire that very much. So if you could do the horrible thing of, could you tell us what your play, The Trade Federation, or let's talk about globalization through the Star Wars prequels, is about? The log line, you might say.
Sure. Yeah. So to give a little backstory on how I wrote the play, I was in grad school. The point of grad school is to write a lot. And I came across some article, I think it was in the AV Club, that was like making fun of the prequels, in advance of some new Star Wars thing. And one of the things they said about it was like, it's so dumb how much time they spend talking about trade negotiations. And I was sort of like, wait, do they? That sounds great to me. I mean, I think that I remember episode 1 being like a huge disappointment, but if they spend a lot of time talking about trade negotiations, maybe it would have grown on me by now. So I went back and I checked it out, and I kind of discovered that the problem with it wasn't that they talk about it too much, but they talk about trade negotiations too vaguely.
Exactly.
Yes.
Sorry, you're really speaking my language right now, so I couldn't help it.
Specificity is the soul of narrative, and there's just not a lot of specificity in those, boardrooms on top of starship scenes in the prequel movies. But I basically was like, well, what if that actually was the movie? What if there was actually, a movie about Star Wars that actually was about the trade negotiations and was about the economy of Star Wars and like the balance of power between the different intergalactic economies and stuff like that. And so, it's kind of like this silly idea I had. And then, what really kind of cracked it open for me was the idea that like, what's funny to me about it is I keep telling people about this idea and they keep telling me that it's a dumb idea. And so I should put that in the play. We'd had somebody come into our class named Brandon Jacob Jenkins, who's a fantastic playwright. And he said, when you're having a problem writing, give the play the problem. And so the problem was that everybody thought this was a bad idea and they thought it sounded boring. And so I kind of made it a play about me pitching this script to George Lucas that is, eventually becomes known as the Trade Federation, a Star Wars story. And he doesn't like it and he throws me out of his office, and then chaos ensues after that. So that was kind of this sort of meta theatrical conceit of the play that jumps back and forth between kind of the pitch meeting and the kind of scenes within my script. And it was also, I was taking like screenwriting classes in the film department, and I found them mostly like pretty boring, and I found the film people mostly pretty boring and like sort of only interested in craft. And some director would come in and be like, this is the film that I made that is, about me and my brother and the horrible abuse we suffered in our childhood in Cambodia. And then all the questions would be like, what size lens did you use and what was your budget and stuff? So part of this is like me, I don't live in LA. I live in New York. I'm not trying particularly hard to break into screenwriting, but this is sort of like an alternate reality version of me where I am trying to, make it in LA as a screenwriter, despite having like all the same interests and limitations that I do in my real life, which is just, I just want to write, super communist agitprop theater all day, every day. And I want that to be my full-time job, which you're starting to maybe see the source of some of my difficulty.
Well, you're doing it very well. I don't know about the making a
Thanks.
living part, but were you a Star Wars fan before you wrote this? Did you consider yourself a Star Wars fan? There was some dialogue to that effect in the play, but I wasn't sure how true to life it was.
Yeah, so I was born in 1991, which means that when episode 1 came out in 1999, I was like 7 or 8 years old, which is the best age.
The perfect age.
For that film. Yeah. I was like basically the same age that Anakin is in the film. And I'd already seen, my dad had like made sure that I'd seen, the original trilogy before that. And like, I remember we had like a book that my dad would like read me before bed, and it had all the names from episode 1, but it hadn't come out yet. So he was like, I don't know, Qui-Gon, is that close? And then we sort of found out the same thing happened with Harry Potter, where it's like, oh, it's not Hermione. So yeah, I was really into Star Wars as a kid. I'm now, I still see all the movies, but I don't like keep track a lot with the sort of extended universe and the video games and all of that stuff. But I feel like Star Wars is one of the like franchises where it's like, yeah, I mean, I've seen what at this point 14 or 15 Star Wars films, so I'm not a huge fan. you know, I've only spent cumulative days watching these films, and many of them I've seen multiple times and stuff. But yeah, I would say I like a high to medium Star Wars fan, but not like a knows everything about all the canon. There was nothing that I felt I knew about Star Wars that got erased in the re-canonization process that made me mad. So that's the level of if that
Understood.
gives you a sense. Yes.
Yeah, no, no, that gives me a perfect sense.
Well, so the first production was Columbia University, right? And then this is according to the notes in
Yes.
the print version, and then there was two, like at least a couple like workshop productions. I
Uh-huh.
was curious, like what is the like original version look like versus now? Was the pitch part like put in some of those workshop
No, that
productions,
was
or
in
was
the
that from the beginning?
original. Yeah, that was in the original production. It's not a whole lot different, actually. I mean, I made some changes that felt significant to me. But if you read the version that was originally staged at Columbia and you read this version, it's recognizably the same play. There weren't huge structural overhauls or anything like that. I think the main reason we did so many workshops was like not so much that like I felt like the play needed a lot of work as like I would send 3 or 4 plays to a director and they'd be like, "Oh, let's do that Star Wars one." So, I'm not complaining. It's definitely found more of an audience than anything else I've ever written, and I hope that that leads them to check out my other stuff. But yeah, it's definitely been the one that people have been most excited to get their hands on, and when opportunities to get my work in front of an audience present themselves, whether it's a kind of staged reading or a full production, I tend to say yes. And so and those workshops were helpful. I mean, I don't want to say that they were just, but I think somebody said something once to me that I think is like very important for playwriting and probably other forms of art too, which is like whenever you're doing a like workshop process, there's like 3 possible goals that you can have, and one is like basically auditioning your play for a theater or an artistic director, and another one is like working on the play, as part of your writing process, and the third is like you want to do a show but you don't have enough money or time to do the full production. And a lot of them were sort of number 3, which was a lot of fun, and it gave me a chance to like work with a bunch of different actors and try out some stuff. And there's a moment of audience interaction at the end, and man, a great way to liven up a stage reading is to give your audience something to throw stuff at. It really really gets the blood pumping.
I have a question about that in terms of I don't know anything about plays, I guess, playwriting or anything in terms of like doing like political, Marxist playwriting. Is that a thing? Is that like a community? Is there a lot of that going on? And then like, I'm kind of curious, is that whole audience participation? Is that like part of it? Is that is there a political bent to that? Either just you uniquely, or if that's something part of a movement. To me, it seems like it is. To me, I can imagine something in the 60s in Paris, like people doing like, oh yes, if you do a play, if you do a Maoist play, you're not introducing the audience. You're a bourgeoisie or something.
Yeah, I don't know about audience participation specifically, but certainly like there is a tradition in left-wing theater of acknowledging the audience. I mean, whether that's in Brecht or Piscator or San Francisco Mime Troupe or whatever, like there's not usually much of a fourth wall. And I think that's true in a lot of my work, that it's, addressing the audience either explicitly or implicitly. As far as like a community, there are definitely some. My buddy Aeneas Sagar Hempel is a great example. My friend Haleh Roshan is an anarchist, but a comrade, I would say. So there's a small hearty group. Another friend of mine, Willie Johnson, and I co-host a reading series in Brooklyn where we try to program as much kind of left-wing theater as we can. So yeah, there's some, and there's certainly a tradition. There's certainly like a well-established like lineage that I feel like my stuff is kind of in conversation with, from starting with people like that, like Brecht and 60th Street Theater and stuff like that, but going into Carol Churchill and Tony Kushner and Wallace Shawn and stuff like that. So I don't feel totally lonely. And if I
My
ever get
friend,
tenure, I'm gonna teach like a Marxist theater class. And one day.
Nice.
Wallace Shawn, Grand Nagazek of the Ferengi.
Yeah, I guess that would be about my extent of
It's
knowledge
wrong
of left wing theater as well. I guess I would say I don't
There's
think
a
there's
great-
really any, at least within the last 30 years, like any filmmaking like that's truly, from a true left wing perspective, certainly not in TV or anything. So I was wondering if it's almost like the one bastion you have as like a writer in that, in a performative space to actually do something like this.
Yeah, it's a low budget enough art form that you don't need, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it, which certainly helps. When you don't need capital, and it's easier to avoid capital, the other,
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that fact actually shapes a lot of the political or ideological flavor of what we do see. Like the biggest movie in a long time is Top Gun Maverick. And off the top of my head, I don't know what the budget of that was. I'm sure it was probably in the neighborhood of $300 million, right? And it's very interesting because it seems to me, as far as like Hollywood is concerned, that's like a politically neutral movie,
Yeah.
right?
yes.
When in reality, it's actually a very ideological movie.
And I'm sure
And you-
the military had a direct hand in, like, I'm sure there were
Oh, for sure.
consultants
but
from the Air
Consulting.
Force
Yeah, you
crawling
don't
all
get
over
that equipment without. What
Well,
I
so-
enjoyed about it though is that when I saw it with all my labor council bros, still enjoyed it. They had a Air Force ad in front of it before this Navy movie played, which I felt was like that had to be something going on there. Little jab.
That's funny. No, yeah. Which, to be clear, like my singling out of Top Gun Maverick is not to say that it's not a good movie that you shouldn't be allowed to enjoy, because if your criteria for enjoying a work of art or a movie was that you had to agree with its ideological underpinnings, like you would literally not be able to watch or read or enjoy anything. But so, because we are talking about the politics, the play is essentially about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and sort of the neoliberalization of the world after the end of the Cold War. Could you sort of explain for maybe someone who's not versed in the politics, like what this is a parable about? Like what
Sure, yeah.
happened?
Yeah. So this is my caveat on this is like I am essentially a comic playwright and not an economist or a historian.
Understood.
But, yes, but I also think it's important to say this shit is not as complicated as they want us to believe, and it's important that we make a good effort to try to understand how like international finance works. So the IMF is one of the Bretton Woods institutions, which was founded at a conference shortly after World War II, along with the World Bank. And so what the International Monetary Fund does is they lend money to countries that are going through financial difficulties. Then they get paid that money back, ideally. There are also all these conditions that are tacked onto these loans, so it'll be like, okay, we'll give you this emergency bailout, but you have to privatize your energy system. You have to introduce competition in your postal service. You have to, introduce privatization in your healthcare system. You have to loosen water regulations. You have to open up to foreign investment. So it does become, some have argued a vessel for US imperial interests and a way for us to say, okay, if this country doesn't want to allow our companies to invest there and to, extract their resources and the labor power of their citizenry, let's just wait around until they get felled by one of the periodic crises that capitalism depends on. And then we will help them, in big, scary air quotes, we will help them out with this loan with a punishing interest rate and with all of these other things tacked onto it. Oftentimes these prescriptions that they say are going to help stabilize the economy actually make things worse, kind of increase the tailspin that they're already in, and just kind of generally fuck shit up for generations. There was a movement in the 1990s that was largely focused against the World Bank and the IMF, which was the anti-globalization movement, or sometimes called the just globalization movement, which had some real successes. And really what brought them back from the precipice was the European debt crisis. And, part of this too that's really awful, I think, is that it takes these important economic decisions out of the hands of the elected governments of these countries and into this sort of shadowy international, which, at best weakens people's faith in the democratic process, and at worst fuels anti-Semitic and racist conspiracy theories that, the global economy is run by a shadowy cabal because it is run by a shadowy cabal. It's just actually it's called the IMF, and we know who they are, and they have speaking engagements, and there's no hidden conspiracy. There's just an open conspiracy.
Right. Right.
People have a sense, like people who don't know this stuff have a sense of like, it seems like everything's outside of our control, and no matter who I vote for, the same policies get passed. And it's like, well, there's a reason for that, which is that these multinational organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have a lot of power and can constrain governments in various ways. I'm sure a lot of that was wrong, but that's,
Well, as like you stated all very clearly, but it's impressive how, like, even more simply and elegantly, the play kind of illustrates all of this. It's very accessible.
Right. So in the play, the Trade Federation is the IMF. That's the allegory. The Trade Federation is the IMF, and Naboo is the developing world, basically. And I even say that at one point, the Andy character is like, and remember, for this part, it's really important to remember that the IMF is the Trade Federation. The Trade Federation is the IMF. So there's a little bit of that, I don't know, Adam Ruins Everything or John Oliver style, just like, I'm going to hit you over the head with it, and that's part of the joke, but also I'm doing it because I think it's important and I want you to know it. Like, I want you to leave the theater having some actual sense of how the IMF works and why it's bad and why, you should mock people who go work for it after they graduate from Harvard or whatever. I also want to say there's a sing-along where I essentially tried to set a modern version of the Internationale to the melody from the Star Wars theme song. So if that at all sounds appealing to you,
I will say I tried to do it in my head, and I couldn't make it work myself. I'll have to see it in person at some point.
I realized at a certain point that there are things that I think are in the melody that other people don't think are the melody. So that's part of the issue there.
I love how you portrayed George Lucas, because one of the things that drives me absolutely up the wall, as I alluded to in the opening, is when people complain about how, a new iteration of Star Wars, how they're making it political, right?
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, George Lucas has literally said Star Wars, his original Star Wars trilogy was about Vietnam, and the rebels were the Viet Cong, and the Empire was the United States military. The Emperor was Nixon. It's not a coincidence that his throne room on the Death Star is shaped like an oval. It's a very political movie. I don't know how you can make a movie that has to do with rebels fighting fascists and not have it like inherently there's a politics that's kind of at work there, even in the most facile depiction of it.
Right. Who's the Empire, motherfucker? That's what I want to ask when people complain about this stuff. It's
right. So the conceit of the play, as you said, is you are trying to convince George Lucas to make this very fleshed out version of the Trade Federation dealing with Naboo and really get into the nitty gritty of the economics of it all, et cetera, et cetera. And he kind of rejects you at a hand. But then what I loved was he seeks you out at the end, and it turns out, no, you're exactly right. That was the movie I was trying to make, but I couldn't talk about it in the office because the Disney suits have ears and there are microphones and stuff. The idea that, I do think that a lot of what you're talking about, the politics in the actual episode 1 movie and the prequels, I think those are really there, but they're just so muddled that it doesn't come through. And setting aside, aesthetic judgments about the quality of the writing or the filmmaking, I have to wonder if a part of that is not kind of the politics of George Lucas himself, I think, are muddled, as they are for many liberals, right? Like, I
think that's true. Yeah. I mean, making a shit ton of money will do a number on your politics. I think George Lucas in 1977 is like absolutely a comrade. And by 1999, I'm like, I think he's maybe not so much.
I feel like in 1977, I feel like he's I think Nixon did something to even the liberal brain back then and the Vietnam War, that even someone who is like a liberal now back then was still like, well, like, like the CIA's evil, because like all that stuff also came out too, like about Operation Chaos and everything. And even I think any Democrat was like, the president's evil, the war is evil, and so I think, I mean, Lucas did have some.
He's a child of the 60s for sure.
Lucas did have some statements.
Right. He's a child of the 60s. Right.
Yeah.
I have no idea if what I'm saying is actually true, but it seems to me he's a capitalist. He's just against greed. And you have a line in your play that I think sums it up. Qui-Gon says, I'm confused. Capitalism is supposed to be democratic. Padme says, that's what the capitalists say, but in practice, capitalism often paves the way for fascists and dictators, and the Trade Federation is fine with that. They actually prefer a dictatorship that does what they want over a democracy that doesn't. And what I think his politics is that we have to be good, responsible capitalists. Otherwise, we turn into fascists. We have to be nice capitalists. I think the argument that I think is not unique to him, I think it's actually very common, is that the problem isn't the system inherently. The problem is that we have deregulated and taken off the guardrails and allowed it to kind of devolve into this
crony capitalism or whatever you want to call it.
Crony capitalism, or right, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is fucking wrong. Yeah, I think that's wrong. If I may, I mean, let's just imagine. Let's imagine that you had, a multinational corporation that was run by an AI. And, and the AI had a prime directive, and the prime directive of the AI was to maximize shareholder value. Like, what would they do? Like, they would pay R&D people to create more efficient processes for doing whatever it is they do. But they would also try to smash unions. They would try to lower wages. They would offshore production to places with, cheaper environmental regulations. And then sure, it's the rules are bad and we need to change the rules. But they would also lobby to make the rules in the United States more similar to what the rules are like in some place like Bangladesh. They would do all of the things that, even if they had even if they're a sort of robot level 1 AI that has no feelings and can't experience, greed, the fact that what you do as a CEO is maximize shareholder value, and that's literally the job, and that people can actually get, if you're a CEO and you decide to do things that don't maximize shareholder value for some other reason, you can actually get sued because that's the job, And so it's yeah, sure, greed. I don't know. I mean, is Jeff Bezos a greedy man? I'm sure. But if he were a robot, he would be doing the exact same stuff that he's doing now. So I just feel like the question of whether they're greedy or not, it almost sort of reminds me of when people are like, well, is this, race-baiting politician really a racist, or are they just doing it for votes? It's at a certain point, it doesn't fucking matter. Let's Occam's razor the thing. That's not a necessary component of the explanation. So we can just treat it like
I mean, if you're talking about you're talking about it in Marxism sense, there is no crony capitalism. It is just there's a scientific process that you have capitalism, and at least a late stage capitalism, and there isn't different types of capitalism. There isn't cronies. It's just literally no, this is what it does, and this is what it will do, and this is what it will lead to.
So what I think George Lucas's thesis, such as it is with the Star Wars prequels, is he's trying to make a warning about what can happen, so we will avoid it. But I think the naivete there is that it doesn't occur to him that it's a function of the system to always have the same end result.
Right. And the sort of the allegory, I think, doesn't really map onto the reality in that, because I think again, all this Trade Federation stuff in the actual movies is very vague and confusing. But there seems to be something where the Sith have corrupted the Trade Federation, etc. When for me, I think. And I think that's sort of what I do in my version of it is I'm no, the problem is the Trade Federation. The problem is capitalism. The problem isn't these evil people. It's that's what, that's the enemy. It's
well,
just...
I think the idea is that because the Trade Federation is profits above all, that they can be taken advantage of, right? That the greed, the profits before people, is weaponized by the evil people, the power hungry and the mad. Not that they're not inherently evil themselves, but that when that's your primary concern, it's very easy for a fascist dictator to take over. I agree that that is very muddled in the movies themselves. One of the things that I didn't even realize until a year or two ago when I happened to rewatch The Phantom Menace was that a part of the table setting of the movie is that the Republic is sort of, where the US was in the 90s, right? It's just on the precipice of it all is about to fall apart. And one of the ways that I think George Lucas is actually trying to say something very provocative, but nobody realizes this. The fact that the Trade Federation, a private corporation, has representation in a Senate the Galactic Senate, he's saying, look how bad it is. A corporation has its own senator, right? But that goes over everyone's heads. I feel like that's actually like kind of a radical thing to be saying in a multi-million-dollar summer tentpole blockbuster movie.
Right, that is explicitly pitched as, a significant step on the road to fascism. Yeah, I mean, his politics remain better than most people who get to make a big sci-fi epic. But yeah, I mean, for sure, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I have my character in the play calls The Phantom Menace the great film of the anti-globalization movement, and I think there is a little bit of that to that. I mean, there's that was a big fear, that corporations were becoming sort of quasi governments, and I think he's reflecting, just like he does in the 70s. I think he is reflecting his times. I mean, that's kind of the process of working through this play and writing it, and doing the different productions of it, is like, I kind of buy it at this point. Like, I kind of just think I'm right, and like, actually Phantom Menace is the great film of the anti-globalization movement. I think that he must have been. I mean, just like, I'll just read the part. So yeah, it says The Phantom Menace came out in 1999, the same year as the WTO riots in Chicago, the Argentine economic crisis, the inauguration of Hugo Chavez, the publication of No Logo. It's the great film of the anti-globalization movement. You'd have to be an idiot not to see the connections. And I'm kind of like, you know what? There are a lot of them.
I like the idea of like Lucas. It's like, it's not the technology thing that made him come back to Star Wars. He was like sitting down. He watched the battle in Seattle. He picked up some Naomi Klein, and he's like, oh shit, I got to get back at it. The world needs new Star Wars now.
The world needs me. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And, I mean, who are the Gungans? I think the Gungans are third world resistance
the pink
movements.
tide.
And so, the idea that like the way they fight back is, the urban bourgeoisie links up with the guerrillas in the mountains. I mean, that's classic third worldism. That's great. Except he's a monarchist. I mean, obviously, what are you going to do? But I think it's an elected monarch or something like that. Isn't
Yes,
Queen Amidala
it's an elected monarch.
an elected queen?
Yes,
Sure.
yes, it's just an honorific apparently, because it's a fairy tale. You have to do a head nod to the fairy tale iconography, right, and terminology.
And I think now she's
but-
canonically a Disney princess, so that's good for her.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, Disney owns her. She was a queen, and Leia was a princess, so she's a Disney princess.
This is like a big, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but like, this is where the two sides of my personality are really at war, because I'm like, it sucks so much that one corporation owns so much of the IP of like all of our beloved childhood memories, but also like all those like X-Men Star Wars crossover comics from the 80s. Like, are we going to get that movie at some point? Are we going to see like Cyclops duke it out with Mace Windu or something? Like, because I'd see it. I mean, I'm just putting that out there. I'll write it if you want me to, Disney, but I would definitely see it.
No, I know that I find is the two parts of my brain that are also at war with itself. I enjoy, love a lot of the stuff that they're doing. It's sort of the no ethical consumption under capitalism thing, I guess.
Yeah. This is also part of the political strategy of the anti-globalization movement that Naomi Klein talks about in No Logo, is like, just saying like, you actually don't get to just, pollute the visual space of our entire culture with your branding without us also getting to fuck with your branding. Like, if you're going to, literally colonize our minds, then like, actually we do own the Coca-Cola logo, because it's like part of our subconscious. So, you don't get to keep it anymore. And like, Star Wars for me is like Greek mythology, or it's like the history plays of Shakespeare or anything. It's this like giant sprawling epic that I can't imagine the world without. And so the idea that just like one company gets to decide what to do with that sucks, and like, I haven't been sued yet. And I think I probably have a decent like fair use parody argument, but like, most of my argument is like, fuck you, man. Like, you don't get to have sole ownership of this thing that like they didn't create alone. I mean, all of these sort of like franchises, the fans create them as much as the creators do, and ideas that come from fan fiction like find their way back into the property. It's totally this like this cycle, and just pretending like it's this one-way stream where they just, kind of shower down on us like benevolent gods. It's like, it doesn't actually work that way. And I refuse to pretend that it does. And so I'm going to like write, my jokes about Yoda having a stacked stock portfolio. I think that's my right.
Or a beneficent cancer, as George Lucas says in your play. Like that phrase, beneficent cancer.
Yeah, what's that like? So this is part before the kind of face turn of George Lucas, where maybe I'll just read that part. So basically, he's talking about, Star Wars is just a brand. What are you talking about with all this political subtext? You totally have it wrong. And my character says, are you kidding me? You wrote the original trilogy as a metaphor about Vietnam. The rebels were standing for the VC. Don't you see that so-called free market globalization is just a rebranding of the imperialism you criticized in the original trilogy? I mean, hello, the bad guys are literally called the Empire. And then George Lucas gives this rather lengthy monologue where he says, honestly, no, I don't. As financial barriers fall between countries, we will unite the whole world in a shared vision of progress through enterprise, of free elections and free press and free markets. We no longer have to treat capitalism like something we found sticking to the bottom of our shoe. We can celebrate the initiative of small business owners like Joe McIntyre, who I met in Ames, Iowa. Joe is an executive at a mom-and-pop petrochemical conglomerate. Right now, his company is liberating the oppressed oil from the tar sands of Canada and bringing freedom to the natural gas of North Dakota. People like Joe the Gas Man are the innovators, the job creators, and the income generators that keep this great country humming. Even today, some people feel that the American experiment has been a failure. You can't stand up for freedom at every turn, can you? To which we answer, yes, we can. Si se puede, shide woman nang. What's in the best interest of America is in the best interest of the world. We will spread freedom like a wonderful, beneficent cancer, until soon it spreads even without our prompting. A new revolution is spreading across the world, not a bloody revolution like in those bad, dark days of old, but a new, peaceful revolution led by nice white people in nice suits, and clean-cut minorities who also wear suits, and cool tech billionaires who wear sneakers and jeans, but who also own very nice suits for special occasions. A revolution that will lift all boats with a common tide, a tide like the one that brought the Arabella to Massachusetts. And like that tide, it will vastly improve the lives of low-income people and minorities throughout the globe by bringing them hot new products like beads, blankets, and sneakers. Just to give the audience a taste of what they're in for.
I feel like that scene hit different the second time reading, knowing that like Disney has the bug in the thing. It's just like George Lucas under duress. He's like blinking SOS as he's
Right.
reading.
He's like, yeah, I'll tell you anything you want.
His hair flopping
I like
around.
that too, like that the idea too of like, Disney has bought Lucas and Star Wars, and like that sounds like something that you'd like ride the carousel of progress, and that would be the propaganda fed to you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that they've not only bought, the intellectual property, and because obviously George Lucas has no day-to-day say in running Star Wars anymore, and yet he's the person I'm pitching it to because it's more fun to pitch to George Lucas than whoever.
Right.
So yeah, in my sort of alternate universe, not only did they buy Star Wars, but they sort of literally bought George Lucas.
They hired him.
Can make him say and do whatever they want.
Well, no, but I mean, like, that also allows you to give him a very lovely character arc that, like,
There you go.
I kept changing wildly my opinion of this version of the George Lucas character. And I was constantly moving back and forth until by the end where I was like, oh, I knew it, George. I knew it. I knew you were still this guy. I knew this is who you really were.
And then it goes back to paranoia.
Yeah. One of my professors in grad school named Kelly Stewart talks about how people, almost like their bodies can be like taken over by language. And that was kind of what I was trying to do in this is like this discourse is so, hegemonic at this point, this kind of neoliberal pablum, that it really becomes like a virus or like a brainworms or something. Like it takes people
like an
over
animating force. It like, changes
yeah.
your demeanor and how. Yeah, no, that's actually very fascinating. Do you think Star Wars is inherently left wing or right wing?
Yeah, I don't think it's inherently any one thing. I think we could obviously imagine like a very, fascist version of Star Wars. And certainly, the last of the most recent prequels I found pretty disappointing in the way that it sort of like jettisoned all of the subversive content of the previous movie and like just totally sidelined several beloved like characters who were played by people of color. I think like that totally sucks. But I do think like, it's basically a movie about a ragtag bunch of outsiders attacking the system, attacking the powerful. I think, it's like when people always say like, even like AOC will say this sometimes, like, it's not about left or right. It's about the people on the bottom versus the people on top. And it's like, well, that's what left and right means. Like what the job of the left is to like fight for the disempowered against the powerful. And that's kind of what Star Wars is about. So, I don't think it's inherently one thing or another, but I think it leans left for sure. I think it's easier to make a left-wing Star Wars movie than it is to make a right-wing Star Wars movie.
I mean, my whole thing is Star Wars is pastiche, in the end of like he's construction westerns, samurai movies, mysticism. And I think then its politics are built in the same manner. It's also a pastiche of the politics that come from probably all those forms too. I mean, definitely to me, like I read Akira Kurosawa is vaguely on the left. So maybe it's almost something where it's just like, again, yeah, it's the idea of like, it's like the band of outsiders, like, like his influence in the Kurosawa films that, you could read as Kurosawa kind of having that too. So it's like built in, but not purposeful, maybe.
And if you want to get real like woo woo with it, like the whole idea of the force as this like life force that connects everybody, like that's solidarity, right? Or at least that's like a metaphysics that lends itself to solidarity in the way that like I think there's always, even in like Christianity, I think there's always like a sort of potential for a left-wing interpretation just based on the kind of the fact of everybody being equal before God. And I think similarly in Star Wars, like the fact that everybody is connected to the force kind of means that you have to care about other people in some ways, just the idea of like some kind of numinous mystic connection, I think sort of nudges you towards the left, I would say.
I would agree with that too. And that's why it kind of rubs me the wrong way when certain of the films try to make one's force potential more linked to like genes and bloodlines and heritage, which
And
which
midichlorians, which are the tiny bugs that create force or whatever. Ugh, so dumb.
yeah, the way that I choose to read that, look, I have a lot of headcanon because for better or worse, like I'm a good Star Wars fan that I came up in a time where it was very difficult for me to process the things about the Star Wars prequels that were disappointing, shall we say. And as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of good stuff is there. It's just muddled, and like you sort of have to do the work in your head to take it the extra step for it to work. And I
Mhm.
like to believe. I like to believe that the introduction of the midichlorians is sort of further evidence that the Jedi, similar to the Republic, have kind of started to lose their way, where they are quantifying this metaphysical force. They are trying to impose some sort of measurability, some sort of way to quantify it.
Instrumental rationality or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my headcanon. I don't think it's right, but
I think
that's
that rules though, Josh. I'd say go with that.
thank
I
you.
had a I
Thank
think
you.
like all great all good young nerds. I had a nerd older cousin, cousin Chris, who let me read all of his back issues of X-Men and Spider-Man and stuff. This is a very memorable moment for me when I was maybe like, 10 or 11, and we were talking about the Clone Saga in Spider-Man, and he just sort of like, yeah, you don't need to worry about the Clone Saga. That's not canon. And I was like, well, how do you decide whether something's canon? And he's like, oh, it's not canon because it sucks. So
Right.
it seems like you have a more sophisticated understanding of this process than my cousin Chris, but that's kind of always been it's like, oh, that's bad. So I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen.
I interviewed one of the moderators at Wikipedia, which is the Star Wars wiki, which you may have consulted, I'm assuming, during the writing of your play.
I did, yeah. Just for like local color, yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course.
The slave
Like I
uprising
don't.
on the Wookiee planet Tashik is canon.
Right. No, but like we talk a lot about the concept of canon and continuity on this podcast. Like I don't really have a lot of time for an over concern of canon. I think like you can do anything as long as it doesn't break the story, right? So if you change something or you do something or you allude to something that actually happened in a different way in that novel or in that other movie, as long as it's not something so clearly different that everyone in the audience is going to go, huh, what? Then you're probably fine.
Yeah.
It's like the folk memory, like whatever someone can be reasonably expected to remember while they're watching it, as long as what the movie is presenting jives with that, I think you're fine.
Yeah. And
I mean,
I
that's
think
me.
for me, it's like, it's about the emotional truth of it rather than the literal truth. Like, like I feel like I've been enjoying the new Obi-Wan Kenobi series. And I feel like it's like, yeah, this is kind of what I imagine him to have been like in the years before the first movie, that he's like hanging out in the desert as a weirdo and like occasionally gets called upon to do Jedi shit. And like that makes sense to me. And so it doesn't bother me that like the fact that he's still going by the last name Kenobi, which is like, obviously a very stupid thing to be doing. Like that doesn't bother me. Like I clock it, but then I just sort of throw it out the window because it's like, and also like with the prequels, I'll say like, this is less true of episode 1, but on 2 and 3, like George Lucas was working on the script while they were building the sets. So the dramaturgy is not always completely airtight. Like these are not 30th drafts, right?
So
am I wrong on this?
no, No, you are 100% correct. George Lucas's filmmaking process, I think as a writer, this is sort of anathema. Like, we have a hard time wrapping our heads around this. But for George Lucas, his process of making movies, and the prequels in particular, was not the normal, you write a script, you nail the script, then you move on to this, you move on. It's sort of one thing that's happening sort of all together, and there are different phases. So the design and concept work is feeding the creation of the story. He starts with, he knows generally like a bunch of things that he wants to have happen. He has some ideas for sequences. He goes to the art department and says, see what you can come up with for like a pod race or whatever, for like, like a Star Wars version of the chariot race from Ben-Hur, right? He knows he wants that.
Just think about it for a little bit.
Yes, right, exactly. Is that a light and magic reference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will also say, yeah, sorry, it's just quick sidebar. Like, I think the pod racing scene fucking rules. I think it's so good. I think it goes super hard. I think it's really fun. I think the fact that there's like a radio announcer who like sounds just like Casey Kasem, like that rules. I think it's really good.
If you want to give George Lucas a break on the midichlorians thing, that seems like it could be the kind of thing when a filmmaker does a sequel and they for some reason feel the need to explain something from the previous movie, in this case a prequel, but it kind of reminds me of like in Halloween 2 when John Carpenter didn't really want to make that movie. So I think I think he says he just got drunk and like wrote the script in a night, but then he decided to make Michael Myers and Laurie Strode's siblings, which is kind of, in my mind, ruins the entire thing. It's just like something that you didn't need to add into a sequel or a prequel, but it's just like, maybe I should explain the Force a little bit more.
I think it's also
like
he wanted. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm done.
I think it's also a little bit like they needed some way to explain like this kid's got it,
yeah.
Like he's got potential, and like there's I think more elegant ways they could have conveyed that, but yeah,
Exactly.
that's part of what they're doing there too.
George Lucas describes what his plans for the sequel trilogy were, and the midichlorians factor in very heavily.
Oh, okay.
So that's why my theory, I know, is not what he was intending at the time. He was introducing a concept that he planned to follow up on later.
It's not just a convenient workaround. Huh. Okay.
No, yeah. You said something earlier, and I think you actually say it in the play as well. You compare the process of writing a play to the process of screenwriting, and how screenwriting is more rigid.
Yeah, my Nana says that. Yeah, my Nana Beth is a character, and it's in that conversation where, she's like, your plays are so great. And I'm like, yeah, but screenwriting is so rigidly structured compared to writing plays. Yeah.
So that is the author speaking, literally, and the character, right? Do you find playwriting a more freeing experience than screenwriting?
Yeah, I do. I think it's also just like that's where my love is. I mean, I like movies, but I'm not. I watch, maybe 3 or 4 movies a month. I'm not like a watch a movie every day type of guy like a lot of my friends are. It's just I like a lot of art forms. I mean, I like novels, I like poetry, I like jazz, but theater is the one that feels like that's where my heart is. And so, recently I've been working on a couple of, not screenplays, but I'm working on a television pilot, and I've tried to have a little bit more of my sense of like me and my own sensibility and my own sense of humor and my own politics and stuff as part of that project. And I think it's gone okay. But I think it's just, it's just a slightly different, I mean, not slightly different, it's a significantly different art form. So it sort of feels like starting from square one in a certain perspective. I mean, there's this like old joke, I forget who said it, but it's like, the joke is like, what do you do after you're done writing your screenplay? And the answer is you go back in and fill in all the dialogue. Which is like dialogue is kind of the main thing in plays. I mean, it's dialogue as a way to pursue action, but the way that people primarily the action that people, or the tactic people use to pursue their goals in a play is they talk to people and they tell people stuff and they ask people stuff and they accuse people of stuff. And that's kind of what you do in a play is you talk, and I love talking, and I have great admiration for sort of the great talkers. But that's like primarily not what you do in a movie. I mean, there are some exceptions, but most of them are, pretty stagey.
Based on plays.
Yeah,
right.
Based on plays, but like, it was interesting. I actually interviewed Andre Gregory for My Dinner with Andre. And I asked him, like, why is that, you mostly worked in theater, like, why is that a play? And he was like, oh, I didn't think it would work if you couldn't do close-ups on all the food, which I thought was great.
Wow.
So he was like,
Wow.
that could only be a film, okay, sure. But yeah, I don't know, it's like, it definitely feels like there is more of a structure. Obviously you don't necessarily have to follow that structure, and I also think most people who've watched any decent number of movies probably have that structure more or less like in their bones, so I think probably
Right.
there's a certain amount of just like muscle memory you can go off of as somebody who watches movies. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure why I've found writing movies so much more difficult than writing plays. It's a little bit mysterious to me.
Well, you made me think of something when you said that you're trying your hand at writing a pilot that has, more of your political sensibilities. Because when you are writing a film or a TV show, you have to have the marketplace in your mind. Like, who is this for? Who's going to make this?
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
Right? Like, where is this going to fit in the marketplace? That's just something you just have to do, whether consciously or subconsciously, or if you worry about it once you've written it, or, I think it even like prunes your ideas of like
Totally.
what has legs, right?
How many
Whereas with a
external night shots can we afford? Yeah, totally. That's something you have to think about. Yeah.
But like when you're writing a play, I mean, you need money because you need to make a living. But for it to be the thing, you don't need that much capital.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've done plays for, the last play that I did, I think had a budget of around like $15,000, which is not nothing. I mean, it's a shitty car. You could buy a shitty car or you could put on my play, but it's an amount of money that you and, the 15 other people that it takes to put on a play could probably fundraise from your friends and family. I mean, obviously there's a certain amount of privilege speaking in that, but I don't come from a lot of money. I come from a like normal middle class family, but I feel like that's an achievable amount of money to raise. Whereas, even a low budget movie is many, many, many times that amount. So I think that's certainly part of it.
Speaking of, and please let me know if this is too personal, but I was really affected by the part in the play
sure.
where I think your character is explaining to George Lucas.
Yeah, George Lucas is like, George Lucas thinks that I'm a spy, and so he's kind of makes me, prove to him that I'm genuine in my sort of anti-capitalist, anti-corporate elite politics. Yeah, and so the way that I decide to do that is by telling him the story of how the 2008 financial crisis destroyed my family, which, in a nutshell is like, credit got very difficult, and my dad had a store selling, furniture, but kind of orthopedic furniture, and it became impossible for most of his customers to buy his products because credit was much harder to come by, and they were usually more expensive than people could afford to buy in kind of one go. And so he fell behind on his rent, and so he got locked out of the store and went bankrupt and got depressed, and and had a motorcycle accident, which who knows how much that was related to the other stress going on in his life, or how much it was just a random weird thing that happened. I've decided to kind of draw those causation lines a little bit in the play, but yeah, I mean, it's a sad story. That I don't want to talk too much about kind of what has happened to my family since then. Suffice to say, I think we're all better off now than we were even before all of that happened. But yeah, I mean, my dad had a store that employed about a dozen people, with like good work that was not just selling some shitty product people didn't need, but was selling products that actually improved people's lives. And because he was a somewhat successful small business person, he was able to kind of support local charities and the church and Boy Scouts and stuff like that, and kind of contribute financially to the life of the community. And all of that got just totally destroyed. And it makes me so mad even just thinking about it, just how much money
No, I
the government is
yeah.
fine shelling out to people who already have plenty of money. I mean, look, like I'm not complaining, but I make a quite modest amount of money, and I pay a third of my paycheck to taxes every year. And like I've been thinking about this with the, the student loan forgiveness thing, which I think, isn't enough, but is still great. And all of these like Republican senators are like, how dare they get their loans forgiven? And the White House Twitter account was like posting like, but didn't you get $50 million of PPE loans forgiven? And it's like, wait, so we just gave a senator $50 million? Like we gave a congressperson millions of dollars of money that we knew they weren't going to have to pay off? Like that's considered, like it just makes me, I get sort of too emotional to talk about it at a certain point, because it's just like, there's nothing that the state under capitalism won't do to prop up the rich. And there's nothing that they will do to make the lives of the poor less horrible.
Well, the thing about that monologue, that moment, which is interesting that you put it in as a response to the feedback you got that it wasn't emotional enough, because it certainly hit me in the feels.
Yeah,
but
I just want to say, like my dad just worked incredibly hard for a really, really long time. I mean, there were parts of my childhood when I really didn't see him for months at a time because he was just pouring everything he had into this business. And when the crisis happened, like none of that mattered, and it just, and
Yeah.
obviously, like, yes, hard work doesn't necessarily create success, and I know that, but it still sucks to see it happen, to see somebody that you care about working really hard and just getting left out, when they were deciding, where to throw money at to try to slow down this financial crisis. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, first off, thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry that happened to your family. And I understand the impulse to caveat it with, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody. I get that, but that does not make what happened to your dad and your
Yeah.
family any less horrible. So I want to make that clear. But the reason why I love this moment in your play, well, I mean, first of all, you do a great thing where it's immediately followed up the lightsaber fight.
Yeah, it's followed immediately afterwards by George Lucas getting his hand chopped off by a lightsaber. Because,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
It's
and
Quentin Tarantino in feet and George Lucas in hands. There's something going on there. I don't know what it is.
I think you're right. Actually, that's good observation. But the reason why I love that moment is because it really, for me, actually tied the whole play together. Because, a lot of the things that we're talking about here are kind of abstractions when we're talking about it, right?
Yeah.
And what you do so wonderfully in this play is you take that abstraction and you make it entertaining and accessible by dressing it up in the guise of Star Wars. So that's great. But what this does is it shows the ground level reality, the real price of what this is in a personal way, and the fact that it comes from you, your character, who is sort of the audience identification figure, or whatever you want to call it. It really brings home what this is all about, what the abstract big ideas about the IMF and the global financial system is about. And this is perhaps a little bit of a stretch, but you're talking about how for you, Star Wars is just kind of this mythology that's always existed. And, those are the stories that we go to, that we tell ourselves to deal and make sense of the parts of living life, of
Yeah.
being human that suck. That's how we get through it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for me, that just really, the rug really tied the room together is what I'm trying to tell you. It's like,
And part of the sort of secret architecture of that moment that I don't know how much this comes through, I don't think I really mentioned this in the play, is that like Star Wars was like a thing that I loved as a kid, with my dad. So like there's a reason why those two things are connected.
Right. Yes.
My dad's favorite place to take a nap when I was a kid was at a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, and then again, like the fact that you followed it up with a lightsaber fight is just, mwah, it's just.
And I will say, we had we used the same fight choreographer for the original production at Columbia and the second version that we did at IRT in Manhattan, because she walked into the room on the first day of rehearsal and was like, all right, what you guys need to understand is that there are 6 main schools of lightsaber battling. And I was like, great, I will hire you whenever I get a chance.
That's
I
amazing.
didn't know that, but that is exactly what I want to hear. Like, we are in very, very good hands.
That's amazing. So you said this is the play of yours that has gotten you the most attention.
Oh yeah, which I should plug. Yeah, so there's a production of this going up in Chicago at Otherworld Theater next spring, April 28th through May 14th. So you can go to otherworldtheater.org for more news and information about that. Yes. Okay, I've done that.
I wasn't going to let you leave without mentioning that. But I was just wondering, do you find that it's more Star Wars fans sort of enjoying this, or like fellow travelers finding things in this that they respond to? It's like,
That's interesting. Yeah.
who do you find really comes out of the woodwork and approaches you about this?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think ideally, I think that people like you three, I think the people who are the overlap is the sweet spot. But honestly, I'm a little confused sometimes about like whether this is a play, like what's the spoonful of sugar and what's the medicine, like whether I'm using leftist politics to make people listen to me talk about Star Wars, or whether I'm using Star Wars to make people listen to me about leftist politics. But yeah, I think it works kind of equally well with each group. There are definitely people who've never seen a Star Wars movie who saw the play and were like, that was so fun. I totally followed everything. But at the same time, I think there are some references that like only leftists are going to get, like, I don't explain what no logo is, but like that's a little bit of a time capsule that's maybe kind of funny to some people. And there are certainly some Star Wars jokes that are pretty deep cut, but hopefully it's a play that rewards kind of prior reading, but doesn't require it. And that's something I try to do with all my plays. I'm going to try to find elegant ways to like get all the information to you that I need you to know for all the other shit to make sense. But ideally you're not walking in saying like, I don't know who Trotsky is, so I'm not going to be able to follow any of this. Like any of that stuff,
Right.
I try to explain so that, kind of any reasonably intelligent person off the street could go to my stuff and enjoy it.
One of the things you touch on here that I really like is like the relationships and conflicts within a larger progressive movement. And it seems just kind of looking at the summaries of like some of your other plays that like that's definitely recurring.
Oh,
You like
for
those kinds of relationships. Yeah.
My next, I'm actually, I don't know exactly when this is going to happen, but I'm going to have my play called Occupy Prescott published by the same publisher that published this one, the Trade Federation. And that's a play it's about, Occupy happened in New York, but also happened all over the world. And it happened in some places where it was like 5 people, and so my play Occupy Prescott imagines a sort of an Occupy site in this town in northern Arizona, Prescott, Arizona, where it's like the 5 people who show up are like an anarchist punk and like a sort of radical Catholic priest and the lady who owns the crystal shop and like a pissed off libertarian rancher and like a nurse who's a single mom. And they try to kind of find some common ground. And the sort of action of the play is that they're trying to like write their statement that's like, here's what we believe, which everybody says the reason Occupy didn't work is because they didn't have, a manifesto. Like manifestos have such a great track record, but, so the process of them kind of trying to find some common ground is sort of the action of that play. And that's something I'm certainly fascinated by. Leftist infighting is like, that's my stuff. Yeah, I love it.
Oh, well, that's sort of the story of the history of leftist movements, isn't it?
Yeah.
The infighting is sort of
that's certainly part of it.
So, Andy, if someone has gotten this far and they are curious about what they heard, where online can they find you and where can they purchase a copy of this play and your other plays?
Yeah, so they can go to andyjboyd.com to find out more about me and all the stuff that I'm doing. Also, if they have a new Play Exchange account, I'm on there. Just search for Andy Boyd. And to find this play, probably the best way is just a Google search, the Trade Federation, No Passport Press, and it should come up pretty easily. Oh, and one more plug is my podcast, which I'm much less diligent about putting out episodes than you folks are, but I co-host a socialist theater podcast called Better Than Shakespeare, which started out as a George Bernard Shaw podcast, but is now just a kind of everything lefty podcast. And we're really on a tear through the plays of Carol Churchill at the moment. So if you want to hear us talk about Carol Churchill plays, check that out. I also am the main host of New Books in Performing Arts, where I interview all sorts of performing art people. But if you enjoyed this conversation specifically, then Better Than Shakespeare is the place to go.
Well, I actually have a very long drive coming up tomorrow, and I need something to listen to, so I'm definitely going to check that out.
You'll be annoyed at the editing, but hopefully the content will make up for it.
I won't be. I won't be annoyed.
Okay,
it's not me talking, so I won't be annoyed at it. Well, I want to thank our guest, Andy, for joining us and being so gracious with his time. You can find links to all of the places he just mentioned in the show notes. Transcripts of this episode and all of our episodes are available at trashcompod.com. And we are TrashCompod across all social media. And we will see you on the next one.